So we are coming to you for our first ever gathering, technically in base camp. We're here in this space this morning, and it's good to be with you and just spending time teaching and going into this idea of shalom and what that means. And we're going to continue to press into that this morning in the midst of all the chaos and COVID, loss of jobs and loss of lives, warnings, disasters, and a virus that's hitting us like a tsunami. I think it's so important that we have one resounding message and voice that speaks to our hearts and also speaks to our neighbors and the people that we work with and our family, that says shalom. It's the word that was spoken into our hearts, and it's the word that we can speak into the lives of other people. And we have an opportunity with those two poles of panic and pretending. They leave a void and a space. And in that space, I believe we speak the same words Jesus spoke to those waves crashing over that boat that day with the disciples. We speak peace, be still, shalom. And so that's what we get to do as a church family and as a people. And so my prayer for you, my prayer for this time together is that we will be a people of shalom. And this will be a time to remind you of shalom. And so I think we have this cheap version of shalom, or of peace in some ways, that we call peace. Is when we're personally safe and happy and secure. It's when things are right in the world and for me and for my stuff. And I was watching a commercial not long ago, and it hit me that this is being peddled to us now in incredible ways. There's this commercial from Amazon that I want you guys to see that shows a version of shalom or of peace, but not the kind that Jesus came to bring.
Free one-day delivery on millions of items with Prime.
There's a near religious quality to this, right? You have Ave Maria, the chief Catholic hymn, playing in the background, and you have this dad who is finding his peace in the midst of all the chaos abounding around him. And all of this brought to you by Amazon for just the nice low price of $400. You too can have your shalom, kind of, right? That's it. I mean, we want our happiness, we want our blue skies, white clouds, our mountaintop experience. And I think we call that peace. And maybe that in some ways is why we have this cultural fascination with wanderlust now, right? It's this search for shalom. And I think we need to know, what is shalom? And so in many ways, our English word peace is a substitute for such a rich Hebrew word. I mean, for us, when we say peace, we mean the absence of something, namely the absence of conflict, the absence of war between countries, or the absence of conflict in your home between your kids, right? It's can I just get 5 minutes of peace? But the Hebrew idea of shalom is not the absence of something. It's actually the presence of something. It's the presence of peace. It's the presence of harmony, prosperity, welfare, completeness, wholeness. That's shalom. And you could think of shalom as this complex collection of pieces that are all brought together in harmony with one another as a whole, one complete thing. And it speaks to wholeness. In fact, in the Old Testament, when Job was counting all of his sheep, he realized that he had them all. And so he would say that his tents were in a state of shalom because he had completeness, wholeness amongst his flock. Jesus, whom Isaiah calls the Prince of Peace, or the Prince of Shalom, he gives us 3 stories in Luke 15. These stories have traditionally been called the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost sons. And in some ways, that is a really good title for those because it begins with lost things. But these are all lost things that in the end are found. And so at the heart of these stories, the essence of these stories, they're stories of shalom. The first story is a shepherd who goes out like searching and leaving the 99 to pursue the one and rejoicing with a full heart when it's found, making his flock whole again. Or you have this woman furiously searching her house by lantern light at night, trying to find the coin she lost, and then throwing a party when she finds it again because her treasure has been made whole. Or you have a dad that shalom comes through when his heart is for his 2 lost sons. And when they're home, he wants a whole home. And so ultimately, these stories are about completeness, wholeness. They're about shalom. And this is why Paul writes that Jesus is our peace. And so this is the crazy part, though, isn't it? Like, we all want this. I mean, in fact, I would say we crave it. It's like the thing buried into every one of our hearts. And it's in our bones, and we know that this world is not right. We want it whether we are white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Democrat, Republican, follower of Jesus or not follower of Jesus, conservative or liberal. Like, you want shalom. It's what we so desire, but we can't have it. Like, we try to find it, but we can never quite seem to grasp it. It's like the time when we were kids and we saw something like high up on that shelf. And like, we wanted to go for it. I mean, we could see it sitting up there and we could almost touch it and taste it, but we couldn't quite get there. It was there, but in some ways it may as well not have been there because it was out of our reach. And some of us, I think, have tried to construct or misconstructed, our own hodgepodge Babylonic towers of investments, politics, and religion, trying to build these structures up that we can go and reach this thing of shalom, only finding that it collapses under our own weight when we reach out to take it, and we never, ever have it, right? And so I believe it's because this path to shalom, or this path of shalom, is the most counterintuitive path that we will ever take. And or maybe it could be better said that our intuition has been corrupted, right? Like, we can't trust ourselves to get us there because our hearts, like a bad compass, have been misguided and they're leading us anywhere but to true north. And isn't this why Jesus came? I mean, he stepped into our world and he said what? He said, "Come follow me." His path is our path. His footfalls, ours. The point of these Sundays, as we gather online and we sit in the season of COVID and job loss and life loss, is to follow Jesus into this place of shalom and to see these stories of how he steps into chaos and pain and brings shalom. And so that's what I want us to do. And so if you guys would turn with me, we're going to go to Matthew 16. And there's a story there in Matthew 16 that I think starts to lay out these 2 paths. One that leads to shalom and one that doesn't. And so Matthew 16, it says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. So Jesus is explaining to his disciples that he was going to die, essentially. And it says in verse 22, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." You have to love this moment, right? I mean, imagine it. Jesus is sharing, and Peter steps up and kind of grabs Jesus' arm and pulls him off to the side and is like, "Look, Jesus, I don't know if you know how this Messiah thing goes, because see, you're the hero of the story, and you're not supposed to die. Like, this is not the way it's supposed to go, right? Far be it from you. Like, you win, we win. This is the way the story goes." Well, Jesus didn't mince words with Peter there. He turns and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And I'm like, ouch. Like, I think that stung a little bit. Ultimately, he's telling Peter that there's a path of God and there's a path of men. And you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. Peter's compass was not set in the right direction. He was going the wrong way, and he was trying to prevent Jesus from going down the very path Jesus came to go down. And so Jesus turns to his followers, and now that includes like you and me. Like, that's us. He turns to his disciples in verse 24 and says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The way of Shalom. It's the way of death. I mean, talk about counterintuitive, right? I mean, this is not at all the way we think we would find peace, is through a cross. And yet, as we're going to see, this is the way Jesus leads us down, and it's the way we need to follow. And the promise is that whoever takes this path, if they try to save their life, they're going to lose it. But whoever loses their life on this path, they find it. And so the question is, are we going to walk this path with Jesus, trusting him? So guess which path Peter takes, right? You guessed it. He takes the path of saving his life and also the life of Jesus. In some ways, the get behind me, Satan speech wasn't enough for him. But look, before we jump all over Peter, let's be honest. Like, Jesus has told us some pretty clear things that we don't follow either, and we just choose to ignore. And I'm guessing that a lot like Peter, most of us have not taken the path that carries a cross. Most of us have taken a path where we tried to save our lives rather than lose it. And so we want the path with Ave Maria in the background and $400 headphones on our ears, right? After dinner and discussion that night, Peter, he comes to the Garden of Gethsemane packing some heat, precisely a sword, And he knew things were about to go down, and he was not going to let Jesus get caught unprepared. There was no way this was going to happen on his watch, And so there would be no betrayal. There would be no death as far as Peter was concerned. Not a chance of letting that happen. But the moment arrives. Judas, the betrayer, comes forward into the night with the temple guard to arrest Jesus. And this is in John 18. So if you want to look there, go grab that. And John writes in verse 10 of John 18, then Simon Peter, having a sword, packing some heat, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. He wasn't aiming for the ear, right? You got to remember he's a fisherman, so swordsmanship isn't really his thing. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? Now, I like how this is rendered in the Passion Translation, so just let me read that to you from John 18. Suddenly, like there's this suddenness that comes up, Peter took out his sword and struck the high priest's servant, slashing off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus, and Jesus ordered Peter, put your sword away. Do you really think I will avoid the suffering which my Father has assigned to me? Like there's the contrast of the paths right there. One who takes out a sword and one who goes, no, do you really think I'm going to avoid the suffering and the path which my Father has assigned to me? I mean, he's telling Peter, this isn't the path. Put away your sword. And so we need to hear that, church. Put down your swords. Put down these things that would lead you down the wrong path. I mean, what drove Peter to pick up a sword? Was it not like the fear of losing his life and the life of his own, the life of Jesus? Peter knew the way the story was supposed to go, and they didn't die. Peter, driven by fear of losing his Jesus, meets this chaos with a sword. He was protecting his interests and his plans because this is not the way of Shalom. Right? In times of fear and chaos, we always have a temptation to take up the sword to protect and defend what is ours and what we have or what we want. In fact, just a quick Google search this week of gun sales showed this. Check this out. Top 3 stories when you just Googled gun sales. Number 1, from the Miami Herald, neither hurricanes nor 9/11 caused as big a surge in gun sales as coronavirus. Or from Madison.com, COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic sparks increase in gun sales in Wisconsin. Or in the Sun Sentinel, gun sales skyrocket in South Florida during coronavirus. Those are the top three, just Googled. Fear is ruling the day, right? And just like Peter, it's driving us to protect what is ours. And this is what we have to understand, guys, that the path of self-preservation is not the path of shalom. It's the other path. It's the other way. See, when you try to save your life, you must protect that life. And you are pushed by fear, and that causes us to move into this place of panic, or take up a sword, or pretend, and we just run away and live in anxiety, or some low-grade version of that. It makes us live in a way that we think is right. It seems right, but in the end, it's a path that leads to death. And even before you take your last breath, the fear of what you might lose robs you of your life and the shalom that Jesus came to bring. And so, we settle for the individual pursuit of happiness along with 1 million other people seeking their own happiness. Blue skies, white clouds, mountaintops, and Ave Maria in the background. All of us as individual people, as individual pieces seeking our own peace. But that's not shalom, right? Shalom is when all the pieces come together in one harmonious whole. Because it is not the absence of all the chaos around us. It is the presence of wholeness and completeness. And that is what Jesus came to bring for us. And so, fear of losing our lives, our needs, our wants, our desires, our stuff, the things of men, it drives us to live in fear and possibly take up a sword and go down the wrong path. And what I'm afraid of is that we move as a church that never finds this shalom. Or we who are the voice in our city to be able to tell others about it can't because we don't know it and we don't experience it. Jesus would say to us what he said to Peter, you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. Yet it was Tertullian, an early church father, who said Christ, in disarming Peter, disarmed every Christian. We are disarmed. We have a deeper way. We have a deeper peace. We live in a world where peace is often brought by whoever has the biggest sword. And we call that peace, right? In Jesus' day, it was the Romans who had the biggest sword. And they had what was called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. But really, it was anything but. There's a historian, Walter Goffert, who is a famous American historian. He said the volume of the Cambridge Ancient History for the years 80, 70 to 192 is called the Imperial Peace. But peace is not what one finds in its pages. See, this was peace brought an edge of a sword, and if you disagreed with that version of a peace, you ended up on a cross. And that's the twist, isn't it? It was the cross where Jesus knew true shalom was to be found. It's not intuitive. The question, do you really think I will avoid the suffering that the Father has assigned to me, shows us the true path of shalom. The way of peace is the way of losing oneself. He would have to enter into that evil and suffering, and there was no way around it. He had to go into it because he was coming for the whole. And so, Jesus knew he would lose himself, that he had to enter into the death, tears, chaos, suffering, slavery, bring it to an end. There was no other way. God was going to use the worst of this world against itself, and he was going to use Jesus to do it. This is a lot like the closing lines of Genesis, where this book opens up with such beauty and creation and intimacy, yet as you turn its pages, descend into chaos, death, disorder, and slavery. Joseph, at the end, being the one who all of this in some ways kind of catalyzes around. And Joseph, after being sold into slavery, turns to his brothers in the closing lines of this book and said, here's what I want you to know. All of this evil that you intended, God has meant it for good. And that's what we understand Jesus is doing. He's stepping into all of this evil because he knows that God is going to take all of this pain and suffering and transform our ashes into his beauty and turn it into something incredible. Like, he's going to the cross and to that point of suffering. That's the path the Father has for him, because that's the place he has to go to see the pieces being brought back to whole. Because he's taking the way of shalom. And this is the beauty of the sovereignty of God, that God is always in control. And Jesus knows it, that no matter what comes, he's going to take this and bring true shalom. And this is the promise that Isaiah made of what would happen with this Prince of Shalom that was to come. And so true shalom, guys, is not about individual people finding their own individual happiness and their own individual serenity. It's about those pieces being brought back together as a complete whole one. The human instinct is to save ourselves at the expense of others. And so we move out in a way that we try to save ourselves. But Jesus understood that the path of shalom was to save others at the expense of himself. Let me read that again. The human instinct is to save ourselves at the expense of others. But Jesus understood that the path of shalom was to save others at the expense of himself. See, it's always been the way of sacrifice. This is the way it moves forward. I mean, shalom with Israel came because of the animal sacrificed each year. They realized someone or something had to lose its life in order for others to find their life. And Jesus understood his role as the one to step into that place, to make the sacrifice so that we could live. That he would deny himself, he would take up his cross, and he would find and lead the way to shalom. And so we, as his followers, are called to step into that. That's what Paul meant in Romans when he said, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. This is your true and spiritual act of worship. This is what we're called into. That we would step into this sacrifice and this loss of self to see wholeness come, and that we would follow Jesus into that way. And so, church, this is my hope for us as we move forward, and what I want to invite all of us into. And so just a few application points here as we close out at the end, looking at Romans 12. First, in view of God's mercy, you cannot lose that view of the cross, that mercy of God. It was Jesus paving the way for every single one of us. It was him coming for us. He is the one who's first loved us. And so you and I, we have to constantly go back to that moment over and over and over again, because it is that taking in and receiving a perfect love that drives out our fear and lets us live in a place of peace, knowing of what he's gone and done before us. And so keep that view of God's mercy in front of you. But then we offer ourselves too as living sacrifices, following him and denying ourselves and taking up our cross and being a sacrifice for this world. And so here's just a few things, and maybe some of them shouldn't even have to be said, but I'm going to say them. Number one, don't hoard. Please do not go to the grocery store and stockpile your cart full of all the TP and all the food and all the stuff and hoard it for yourself at the expense of others. It's not what we do. It's not what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And this is a time for us to live with open hands and open lives, to open ourselves up to all the other pieces in order to see wholeness, that we would not move towards our own individual happiness, but we would move towards the self-sacrifice of ourselves on behalf of others. And so don't hoard. Number two, open yourselves up to the conversations that are hard with others. In this season, there's some of us who feel it more than others, and I think the temptation for those of us who don't feel it as much is to not want to pick up the phone and call and check in on people. We need to be doing that. There is a sacrifice that you make of your time and your life and your day when you call and check in on people who are in need. But that's what we're called to. And so lay down your time, pick up the phone, stay checking in with your group, with the people around you, with your neighbors, with those people that maybe you don't want to have the conversation with, because you know it's not going to be 2 minutes, it's going to be 20. But step into that. Number 3, live with open hands. I think at this point in time when stock markets crash and fear abounds, there's a sense where we want to tighten our hands around things. And I think that it is a time not to tighten our hands around things, but ultimately to open our hands, to be generous, to offer help, and whether that's money or groceries or childcare to people who are in need. And so, church, I just ask you to open your hands in the same way that Jesus has opened his towards you, and that you would lay down your life on behalf of those around you. So give your time, give your money, give what you have, especially to those who are in need in this season. So as we close, you just open your hands up, just right there where you are. And if we can just sit in this moment for a second and just say, Father, thankful that we can come before you this morning. We're thankful that your Son has pursued the way of peace, that he did not take the path of self-preservation, that he denied himself. And Father, what that means for us is that we now have that peace that's offered to us, that he made peace through the blood he shed on that cross. And Father, I pray that we would take up that life. Father, I pray that we would just breathe in that peace, and we would breathe out that peace. That you would make Red Door a voice of shalom in this city amongst our neighbors and everyone around us. Amen. Church, be blessed. Love you guys. Go in peace.